in agreement with. Oh, good, June. Once she does that, then she'll be able to come back to the board because why should we move forward hearing application if JCP&L is going to require her to move certain items? So they're working those details out. So we asked her to give another extension of time through, I put it through August, through the August 24th meeting. So if anyone's here on that or interested on that application, which is the Muphy, M-U-P-H-Y, pronounced Muphy Lopez, 1094 Bordentown Avenue. That's continued to next month. We're just continue it month to month. She's hoping to get this stuff taken care of. JCP&L asked if they could expedite their review and execution agreement has been hanging out in front of the board for a while. That's the status of that.
Thank you. We have one application tonight, the Insight Development Partners LLC 2202. Oh, I'm sorry.
Bob, one second. We forgot to do the Open Public Meetings Act.
Not a problem. Is that one?
I think so.
Notice of the
Yeah, that's it.
This one. Notice of the meeting has been satisfied in accordance with Chapter 231 PL 1975 by advertising in the Home News Tribune, notifying the Sentinel Publishing Company and Star Ledger, posting of on the bulletin board and filing with the borough clerk. All right.
So the first application is Insight. Smith, why don't you put your appearance on the record?
Thank you, Mr. Kim. For the record, Mr. Chairman, my name is Bob Smith. I'm a licensed attorney in the state of New Jersey, and I'm here tonight representing Insight Development Partners.
So Bob, I wanted to take care before we proceed. One, we've received your notice. Notice is in order. The board has jurisdiction to hear your application this evening. As you're well aware, you require D variance relief.
I do.
Which requires 5 affirmative votes of the board. Unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond our control, including transportation issues, we only have 5 members here this evening. I don't know if you wish to proceed. If you do, you certainly have the right to ask the board to continue to next month so we can have board members here.
We'd like to proceed.
Okay.
And we hope to put on such a great application that we're going to feel confident that there's 5 affirmative votes. On the other hand, if we're not that confident, we'll ask to have the vote at the following hearing.
Which will
Let us make our best effort.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. So the property we're talking about tonight is 6125 Main Street. It's an 8.43 acre property, and it's next to, or it is, we're not quite sure. It was a comment in one of the review memos that it formerly was the Abe Korb Junkyard. So it's located at the corner of Main Street and Scott Avenue. We have a site, we are seeking use variance, which we'll talk about in a second, but we have in front of you tonight a site plan application for a 117,813 square feet office/warehouse. That 117,000 square feet is broken down into 7,262 square feet of office and 110,551 square feet of warehouse or logistics, if you want to use a euphemism. I do a lot of land use work around the state, and I will tell you that I'm going to call this, for lack of a better phrase, a baby logistics warehouse. And the reason I do that, we've done approvals next door in Carteret for over 1 million square feet in one location, Monroe and South Brunswick, again, for over 1 million square feet, South Plainfield for close to 500,000 square feet. This may be the smallest logistics center that I've represented in 5 or 10 years. But it's a nice little one. So with that in mind, let me tell you about beside the site plan approval, we're seeking a use variance. And the reason for that is this is in the B3 zone. B3 zone is a commercial business type zone, but it doesn't allow logistics centers. So we're going to try and convince you this is the right use for this property. That's a D1 use variance. Also, we're asking you for a D6 height variance. And the reason for that is we're asking for you to allow us to build a warehouse at 54.71 feet high. And in this particular zone, 35 feet is the limit. And you're going to hear from our experts, and always, as a lawyer, you're trying to get your case in early, but you're going to hear from our experts that modern logistics centers need height. They're high cube. And this area, when we talk about the area, you're going to find out this is a good location for it. In addition to the use and height variance, we're seeking 4 bulk variances, one for minimum front setback, where required is 50, and we have 50 foot on Main Street, but 10 foot on Scott Avenue. That's the request. Minimum building coverage, 25% is required. We're asking for 28.5% building coverage. Freestanding site setback, and we're going to make a safety argument on this. It's supposed to be half of the front yard setback. So I just mentioned to you the front yard setback's 50, half would be 25. We're going to be asking to put some signage at 5 feet for safety reasons, and we're going to try and justify that to you. And then there's also a last bulk variance of insufficient freestanding sign clearance where 18 inches is required, and we currently have this plan for flush with the ground. We're also going to be asking for a number of design waivers, which we'll describe as we go through our testimony. It's my intention, Mr. Chairman, to call five witnesses. The first witness is Paul Brown, who is Insight Development Partners. Second witness is Tom Muller, who is our licensed PE, to go over the site plan with you and describe all the aspects of it. Third witness is Craig Paraguay. Craig Paraguay is our professional engineer who's our traffic expert. We've done a traffic study and we can tell you what the impact would be on Sayreville. Fourth witness, Chuck Dietz, who is our architect, who's going to show you what it looks like. And I will tell you, because I've represented Insight on many occasions, they don't build schlock. They build really nice looking buildings, but we're going to show you. We're going to show you what it looks like. We're going to show you other projects that they've done. And then finally, our fifth witness is our planner, and it's the mystery planner. Our planner is John McDonough, very well-known planner. He's currently in East Windsor, and he's racing the clock. Their meeting started like at 6 o'clock, and he believes he's going to make it in time. If he doesn't, he's going to be an unemployed planner. But that's our last witness to give you the municipal land use justification for the granting of the requested variances. So with that being said, Mr. Chairman, I'd ask that Mr. Paul Brown be sworn, called and sworn, so that he can give testimony.
John, he went over everything pretty well on the variances and stuff.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I agree with the variance rundown that Mr. Smith went through, so nothing else to add there.
Great. So, Mr. Brown, if I could ask you to come forward, and can 2 microphones work at the same time?
Should.
Okay.
Like a duet here.
There you go. Mr. Brown, please raise your right hand. You swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
And give us your name, and although it's obvious, please spell your last name.
Paul Brown, Brown like the color, Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
And Mr. Brown, you're here as a representative of Insight Development Partners. So for the record, by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm a partner and founder of Insight Property Group. We are a nationwide developer of logistics facilities.
Okay, and while you look like a really young guy, you got a lot of miles on you. Would you tell the board about some of those miles? What kind of things have you done?
Well, I'm old enough to see a lot more of my hair in the shower drain than my wife's now, unfortunately, but we've built warehouses from Florida up here to New Jersey and everywhere from LA to San Francisco. So we have a lot of experience in the logistics space. We have very close relationships with Home Depot, Amazon, a lot of the new innovators. Logistics centers to be high functioning, high environmental standards, and good places for their employees to work long term in order to help maintain their business models.
Would you name a few of the projects that you've done?
We've done the logistics center in Los Angeles, 350,000 feet. We've done the project in Clearwater, Florida for Amazon, which was 200,000 feet. Another one in Jacksonville that was a few 100,000 feet. We also run and manage over 50 million square feet of logistics centers across the planet.
Okay, so why do you want to build a logistics center in Sayreville?
It's the center of the universe.
That is the correct answer, but to be more detailed.
We see a lot of demand in Sayreville with the growth that's coming. I mean, you drive around the city and there's a lot of condominiums and houses being built. We're seeing a lot of population growth come here, and as a result, the last mile logistics is going to be very necessary to help accommodate a lot of the e-commerce and online marketing that consumers today are requiring versus the traditional real estate that we've seen in the past.
I call this in my opening remarks a baby logistics center. Was I wrong in that characterization? And why do you think this is a good product here?
Yeah, we typically see the average warehouse now 500,000 feet plus. That's typically a product of the transformation to e-commerce. But as a function of that, a lot of the mid-size companies do not have an opportunity to get into real estate right now. If you have a 100, 500 or million footer, you're going to go to one of the Fortune 50 companies. They'll probably take it upon completion. But what's happened is there's a big gap in the light industrial space for mid-cap size companies, maybe even local operators, New Jersey-based companies, or even Sayreville companies, and they're not having their real estate needs satisfied because all the developers are chasing the bigger projects, and that's primarily because there's bigger dollars involved.
All right, now a question I'd ask you if I was a member of this board would be, what hours of operation are you seeking and why are you seeking them?
Typically, we see most warehouses operating in a double shift right now. So we'd like the opportunity to keep the facility open, around those hours.
Well, I'm going to rebut you. What you really want to ask that board for is the ability to do 24/7.
Yes.
And the reason being, if you do any restrictions, it decreases the value of your property, correct?
And sometimes the leasability, a lot of commodities come in the evening or in the early morning. So we would like to have access to the facility 24 hours a day.
Right.
While we do not see any operations going on 24 hours a day, we would like access to.
Right. And is it a true statement that most of your projects, 80–90% of them are usually 2-shift operations
Yes,
and maybe 6 days a week, sometimes 7?
yes,
All right,
correct.
so this is what is called a spec building. And the reason for that is?
We don't have a tenant in place right now, but we do see vacancy in New Jersey less than 1%. So we have high conviction that this project will be leased upon completion or during construction. If not, we own a lot of other properties in New Jersey. We could potentially occupy the building itself if we don't have a tenant. So, but we don't have any concern about bringing a tenant.
Right. And did Sayreville's road network transportation access affect your decision about
Definitely.
location?
Definitely. Being on Main Street, having access to both interstates without having to pass through any residential zones is a huge plus for the way
So-
we approach logistics.
One of the reasons that you particularly like this site is you do not expect to hear from residents that you're going to be putting traffic on their streets.
That's correct. And we also like that it backs up to the water so we can orientate the building in such a way that no logistics operations or trucks will be exposed to the main road or any of the residents in the town.
Okay, and we're going to show that to everybody with the architect. But anything else you want to add?
We're grateful you guys came here tonight, and would just leave you with the knowledge that we do our best to build the best facilities in the country. We're very well capitalized. We choose the best architects. We never spare any expense from an environmental standpoint, from a regulation, or from an operation. We like to build the best in class assets. That's been our reputation, and we plan to uphold that in the town as well.
Good. Mr. Brown's available for questions.
I have one. If you could address the issue about being open 24 hours, and you had indicated 80 or 90% of your other warehouses are just a 2-shift operation?
Yes, that is correct. And the reason we requested 24 hours is occasionally there might be trucks that come in the middle of the night that need to park behind the logistics facility. We don't want to, have a tenant be in a situation where they might require a delivery to stay on the road overnight because they're fearful they'll be in violation of their operating hours from the town.
And let me just throw one other at you, only because I'm doing too many of these applications. Aren't there tenants frequently have seasonal issues? For example, it gets to the Christmas season and now their delivery schedule gets heavier and they do need longer hours.
Yeah, definitely. That's the case.
So that's the reason why you want to have the freedom at this point to have a 24/7 operation, although it's not likely that that's going to happen.
Very unlikely. But
Good.
One other question, will there be like a guard gate or something like that?
Currently, there's not a guard gate on it. If the tenant will require one, we will obviously come back and ask for the appropriate approval to do so. But right now it is open.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board?
It would be my anticipation, given the current market demands, there'll be one tenant. It'd be very unlikely to have multiple tenants, and the building is designed in a fashion to accommodate one, but there could be multiple.
Reason being size. It's a baby logistics center. But you could have two. That's possible, right?
Yeah.
Certain businesses that you wouldn't want to have, like fireworks or something like that.
Yeah, we, like I said, are a very environmentally conscious company, as is the case with a lot of banking relationships we have. We really like to stay clear of any controversial tenants. This is typically distribution logistics. And I'm very picky about my tenants. I know that's a really vague statement and I apologize, but there would never be any explosives or fireworks or, yeah. Yeah.
So any manufacturing, fabrication, assembly.
Currently, that's not being designed for or accommodated for. And if we did switch from a logistics to a more light manufacturing, it would require some significant design changes. So we don't anticipate that being the case.
One other question that brought up, are there things, I don't know, that we would be concerned about them storing at all? Carl or Jay, I mean, or John, I mean, when you have a warehouse like this, flammable, you know, whatever.
Mr. Chairman, usually during the building process, they're giving information to the fire officials when they're reviewing permits and stuff. And tear sheets on the materials that'll be in there to make sure if there's anything needed for hazardous materials, fire issues, that the building's properly rated and sprinkled for that. So usually it gets handled at that phase. And as Mr. Brown indicated, he tends to shy away from anything that would do that because having represented warehouse developers, it becomes an insurance issue for them as well. So they're always a little careful. So I think that it gets you into those processes.
Any other questions from the board?
Actually, I do have a quick question is, I didn't, and this may be through your other testimony, through the other witnesses. I know it's a spec building. You have a 2-story office in the corner. I guess is more also dependent on tenants. Is there any thought of the elevator in that area or using any of that? I've seen second floors, mezzanine space, so to speak, used for security areas like folks who do high-end electronics and, you know, if they're shipping jewelry and stuff, they might have a segregated area in the second floor. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it just, there's a question, just so I'm clear, is there, will there be an elevator to access the mezzanine?
Yeah, or use the mezzanine for something besides office.
Typically, the mezzanines in industrial are used for storage and things that are sensitive to the logistics operation. We do put it in there in case there is what we're seeing now also is a lot of logistics are consolidating with their business operations. It's been a trend that's been going on for about 5 years where a company will use the logistics building to also be their office headquarters. And we want to have the flexibility to, if a nicer high-end tenant comes out, we want to be able to accommodate them from the alpha standpoint. That's why we request the mezzanine.
Okay.
And if there is a need for that, we will definitely make sure we're in compliance with all ADA issues and other building code.
I'm sure your site engineer and your traffic engineer will get into your parking on site because it appears to be you have plenty of parking, whether that is office or warehouse, but just was curious if you had any thoughts on that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, guys.
Can you just describe like daily operations? What type of folks are coming in,
Mhm.
number of employees, employees to shift?
Yeah, typical industrial warehouse usually has anywhere from 1 employee per 1,000 to 10,000 square feet of space, depending on the operation. So an intense logistics center would have 1 employee for every 1,000 feet. Average is roughly about 1 per 10,000. We probably see something more traditional along those lines.
1 per 10,000.
Yes, correct.
So you're talking probably 11, 12, 13 employees, something like that, correct?
Yes.
So tractor trailers are coming in?
Yes, tractor trailers usually come in, back up. Goods will be unloaded, sorted, resent back out for distribution.
And then unloading, I mean, backing up to the building. Right?
Yes.
Unloading outside.
Yeah, so we actually went, typically a warehouse of this size would have anywhere from 4 to 6 loading docks. We have 14 on this project, so we always want to make sure there's room for as many trucks that come in to be backed up to the building, serving their primary function. So there's not a displacement of the trucks as they come in or out. So we typically go above and beyond industry standards and planning standards. In this case, we're roughly 30-40% greater than those.
And the trucks going out, they use small delivery trucks or you tractor trailers? Also?
No, they're typically, it's been my experience on warehouses this size that the trucks go out are typically smaller box size because they're going to the end consumer.
A lot more of those going.
I couldn't speak to that, but you mean running around the community or in the facility?
So
Yes, there would be some.
is it sort of like around 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock?
No, they're typically done and out by then. Any small trucks that come out are usually trying to deliver within business hours. So I would say that they'll probably be going home the same time everyone else goes home, 4 or 5 o'clock.
And we have Mr. Paraguay, who's our traffic guy. That turn off for me?
I think you're on.
It shows red. Am I okay?
I mean, it's on.
Easier to.
Here you go, hand off.
Okay, go ahead. We'll work on this guy
For the moment. If there are no other questions for
Any
Mr.
other questions?
Brown?
Continue.
All right.
Oh, I'm sorry, John.
I'm sorry, Mr. Brown, come on back up.
Thanks for coming back. Mr. Brown, just in terms of, you'll continue to own the property and lease it, is that the intent?
Yes, that's the intent.
And has it been a practice to ever lease parking spaces or trailer storage spaces or container storage spaces on any of your properties that aren't affiliated with the tenant?
That does not currently exist anywhere in our portfolio,
Not
not intended for this area.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman, if it's appropriate, I'd like to call Mr. Tom Muller, our PE, to be sworn in so he can give testimony. Okay.
Just put that.
Is the thing that lights up red, is that a microphone also?
Yeah.
So that works too.
Yes.
All right, well, we'll pass it back and forth.
Why don't we swear, Mr. Muller?
Please.
Mr. Muller, please raise your right hand, sir. You swear firm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
And nice tie. I was aware of that tonight, but decided not to. Could you give us your name, spell your last name for the record?
Sure. Thomas Muller, Muller.
Thank you. Please continue.
Mr. Muller, for the record, by whom were you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Dynamic Engineering Consultants, 1904 Main Street, Lake Como, New Jersey, 07719. I'm a senior principal with the firm. I've been with the firm for over 10 years.
All right, and
Do you accept this qualification?
yes,
Sure you don't want any credentials?
If
I
you
mean,
want
I'm
to put
all
them on
set
the
up to
record,
do
you can go ahead.
The only reason, he mentioned that he had been in Sayreville 15 years ago and he was accepted by the board, but wasn't sure which board, but just to protect the record.
Certainly go right ahead.
Could we have the 30-second version of your credentials?
Sure. Absolutely. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey, first and foremost. I'm here to do the testimony on the site engineering and the civil engineering work. I have a bachelor's and master's degree from Rutgers University. I've done many projects like this in the area in New Jersey and New York.
testify before many municipal planning.
Yeah, many boards throughout the state. This is my first opportunity in front of this board, however.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'd ask that he be accepted as a PE.
Yes, yes.
All right, if you would, Mr. Muller, we'd very much appreciate it if you would describe the existing area and the existing conditions and then describe the project. And is this a board? Is this one that the,
Like me to use this?
please, yeah, that'd be great. And if you would mark it A1 and today's date.
Yeah, actually, yeah, that's something new. Yeah, if it's a plan sheet that was already submitted, then you can just give us the sheet number. But if this is something new, then we just.
Is this colorized, a colorized version of what you've already submitted?
The new exhibit, but it's almost identical to the aerial map that's part of the site plan package, but it is a new exhibit.
Thank you.
All right, and if you would, I'm going to give you back the microphone. If you wouldn't mind, please describe the area.
Yep. So what we have on the easel is an aerial map exhibit prepared by Dynamic Engineering Consultants, simply a colorized aerial image of the site. Property is outlined in yellow in the center of the exhibit. The ring around the property is a 200-foot limit that shows the properties within 200 feet. We have a colored line on the right side of the exhibit that delineates the municipal boundary between Sayreville and South Amboy. North arrow is up on this page, so I'll be referencing that throughout the testimony. Just for the record, the property consists of about 24 very small lots. It's an assemblage of different lots that'll be incorporated and consolidated as part of this development project. Just for the record, they're identified as block 280, lot 1.02, 280.01, lots 1 and 2, block 281, lots 155 through 58, 116 through 119, block 282, lots 1, 2, 210 through 213, 306 through 309. Property also includes a portion of Laurel Street, which is identified in the middle of the site on the aerial exhibit A1. Property is commonly known as Lower Main Street, which is County Route 684 in the borough of Sayreville. This is one of the last properties that you have in the municipality. It's almost tucked away at the furthest northern tip of the municipality, right on the border of South Amboy. We have about 820 linear feet of frontage on Lower Main Street. We also have about 710 linear feet of frontage on Scott Avenue, which is on the eastern portion of the property. Main Street is a 4-lane divided roadway. There's a grass median through the middle of it. There's 2 lanes going westward, 2 lanes going eastward. We are proposing to eliminate Laurel Street. As I mentioned, it's a paper street. It's not developed at this time. It essentially dead ends at the Raritan Bay, serves no purpose, municipal purpose. The applicant is in the process of formally vacating that with the governing body. In terms of the lot size, the Laurel Street portion is about 0.75 acres in size. The assemblage on the west side of Laurel Street is about 5.27 acres. And the assemblage on the east side of Laurel Street is about 3.17 acres. Overall, once we consolidate this project property, it's about 9.19 acres in size. The existing use on site is relatively simple. There is no existing use for the most part. Some of it is used as an open trailer storage area. It's dilapidated gravel, overgrown vegetation. There's a fenced in area that's encompasses a meter pit and water main facilities along the main street. Historically, it's been cleared since at least the 1930s. It was mentioned by council that this was a junkyard. The Abe Corp junkyard at one point came in 1978 for a planning board application to propose automobile storage and dismemberment. In 2000s, it was used as a construction yard for portions of building the Raritan Bridge. But as you see it now, it's essentially undeveloped, unmaintained, and overgrown. There are a number of environmental land use constraints on the property. As you can imagine, to the north of the site is the Raritan Bay. We have freshwater wetlands, coastal wetlands along the northern and western portions of the property. The entirety of the site is a flood hazard area, which I'll touch on in a minute. So that did play a role in our ultimate design of this project. In terms of zoning, the site's in the B3 zone, the business zone. Proposed use that we're seeking tonight is a use variance, which I'll touch on in a minute. There's existing access to the site on Main Street as well as on Scott Avenue. In terms of quickly the surrounding areas, as I mentioned, the northern portion of the site is the Raritan Bay and wetland areas. To the east is Scott Avenue within the B3 zone. And beyond that is the city of South Amboy and the Beacon Metal Scrapyard. To the south of our property is Main Street, and beyond that are a number of industrial uses. And to the west of us is undeveloped area. There is a automobile storage yard there. And beyond that are retail uses as well. I could just hop into the proposed conditions now. This exhibit is a new exhibit. I'll mark it as A2.
Yes,
Thank you. A2 is an overall site plan rendering prepared by Dynamic Engineering Consultants dated April 27th, 2022. This is just a colorized version of the identical site plan that was submitted as part of the application. All it is colorized. We overlaid the landscaping here. Just helps identify the site and colorizes it so you can see the different land covers. The building that we're proposing is in the middle, shown in orange. The asphalt and concrete areas are shown in grays and beiges, and then the landscapes are shown in greens and browns. So what we are doing tonight is seeking preliminary and final site plan approval and use and bulk variance approval for this construction. As I go through my testimony, I just want to touch on, I did receive the board professional review letters. We had 2 sets of review letters, one dated in January of this year. We had the opportunity to meet with your professionals, revise the plans, submit back, and then we did have the opportunity to get new review letters, which I'll incorporate throughout my testimony. And as I mentioned, we attended a couple meetings, number of meetings with your board professionals. We worked hand in hand with them on this design. In terms of a high level summary of the development, as Mr. Smith mentioned, we're proposing a warehouse here. It's 117,813 square feet in size for gross floor area. The building itself is actually only 114,182 square feet in size. The reason for that is we do have an interior office space, which is 2 stories, which is a total of 7,262 total square feet over that 2 stories. We're proposing 90 parking stalls, 13 loading spaces, 2 drive-in ramps, 29 trailer storage stalls. We're proposing walkways around the perimeter of the building as well as along the frontage of Main Street. We're also providing a substantial offsite improvement on Main Street to provide a dedicated left turn lane into the site. As I mentioned before, Main Street is currently a divided highway with a grass median. We're actually removing that grass median, providing a left turn lane into the site to facilitate movements into the site. Just to give you an idea of how we arrived at this layout, a tremendous amount of time and effort went into this layout. We worked hand in hand, as I mentioned, with the board professionals, but we also worked hand in hand with the applicant and his professionals as well. So first and foremost, we always like to identify the site and identify the zoning restraints on the property. So what we did along Main Street was provide the 50-foot setback that the ordinance currently requires. So we set this building back to comply with the front yard setback requirement on Main Street. And that pinch point is really on the bottom left of the exhibit, which is the southwest corner of the building, where we have a 50-foot setback there. As you could see, Main Street starts to taper away from the building. So the setback starts to increase in size as you get eastward on the property. On the right side of the exhibit, which is the east side of the site, we have Scott Avenue, which is technically a public right-of-way, but it really only serves our site as well as the municipal pump station to the northeast of our site. So it's really just it's an unimproved road. It's currently gravel. It's gated off at a certain point. So what we're doing is we really treated that as a side yard because it really doesn't serve a purpose as a front yard. So we did provide the required side yard setback to that street of 10 feet. But as Mr. Smith mentioned, we are requesting a setback variance there. On the northern and western portions of the site, as I mentioned before, number of environmental constraints such as freshwater wetlands and coastal wetland areas. So we are restrained by those buffers and setbacks, which helped us refine the layout along those areas in terms of providing the storage areas, the loading areas, the walkways around the northern and western portions of the site, and obviously the drive aisles around the site. Just in terms of the overall site plan layout, we have the parking area on the southern portion of the site. That is 90 parking stalls, as I mentioned before. We were able to provide loading completely in the rear of the site. So the site is designed to accommodate tractor trailers, WB67 trucks, which are 53-foot trailers, the largest trucks you could see in New Jersey. So any trucks that size or smaller could work in that loading area. And we were able to tuck that away in the back, so there will be no visible impact to Main Street, which is the main thoroughfare through the area. And as you wrap yourself around the northern and western side, as I mentioned before, there's a drive aisle that wraps around that. So we don't have dead end parking or loading areas. We have full circulation around the site, which helps facilitate movements for all vehicles, including fire and emergency access vehicles. Just to summarize the zoning very quickly, this is in the B3 zone. Warehouses are not permitted in the B3 zone, so a use variance is required. You'll hear substantial testimony from the planner, professional planner in a few minutes. We do comply with quite a number of the bulk standards in the B3 zone. For instance, minimum lot area, minimum lot width, lot depth, the front yard setback to Main Street, the rear yard setback, the side yard setback, the combined side yard setback, and the maximum lot coverage are all compliant on this project. In terms of the zoning ordinance, the ordinance allows 85% lot coverage. We're proposing only 56.3% lot coverage, so we're well under that requirement. We do not comply, however, with the front yard setback on Scott Avenue, as I mentioned. 50 feet is technically required. We do provide 10 feet, which would comply with the side yard setback requirement. But since Scott Avenue is really a public right of way, it's technically a variance where 50 feet would be required. We're also requesting a maximum building height requirement variance. 35 feet is required. 54.71 feet is proposed. That's calculated as an average grade around the building. So that's why it's 54.71 feet in size. You'll hear from the project architect in a little bit about the building height as well as the professional planner. But it is a result of modern warehouse design. You'll typically see buildings of this size. There are no, as I mentioned before, there are really no neighbors that this impacts, but you'll hear a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And then we are also asking for a maximum lot coverage by buildings. 25% is required by the ordinance, and we're proposing 28.5% building coverage. And again, this is really just a result of the environmental constraints on the property and modern built warehouse design, where we don't need to maximize the pavement on the site. We need to maximize the building size. We don't want to have more pavement than building because the pavement would essentially be useless. So just as a result of the ratio of parking and loading that we need to serve a building of this size, technically it requires a maximum building coverage variance for the size of the building. The parking that we're proposing is completely compliant with the ordinance. We broke out the office. The office requires 29 parking spaces. The warehouse requires 22 parking spaces for a total of 51 parking spaces. We're proposing 90, which complies with the ordinance, all of which will be 9 feet wide by 18 feet long, which also complies with the ordinance. Sidewalks and striping throughout the site to facilitate pedestrian movements as well as passenger vehicle maneuvering throughout the site. 24-foot drive aisles, which complies with the ordinance. ADA and electrical vehicle stations throughout the parking area to comply with federal and state regulation. Project's been designed with clear sight triangles at all driveways and drive aisles. We're providing signage throughout the parking area as well as the driveways to force the trucks to the back like we need them to, prevent them from going into the parking area in the front of the site, then making the appropriate maneuvers out of the site. For the loading calculation, as I mentioned, the project is designed for WB 67 trucks, which is a 53-foot trailer. The ordinance requires 1 parking space for the first 25,000 square feet of building, and then 15,000 square feet for each additional. So we need a total of 8 loading spaces. We have 13 plus 2 drive-in doors, so we do comply with the ordinance. The loading area in the back will be concrete to help protect that area. It's a more durable material, so there is a concrete loading area in the back. We also have 29 trailer storage stalls on the opposite side of the loading area on the northern portion of the site. To the west of the loading and trailer storage is essentially a striped hammerhead area that you could see on the exhibit that allows the trucks to pull in and back into the loading areas and then exit the site. In terms of access, we are proposing the left turn lane into the site from Main Street. We're proposing a full movement driveway for passenger vehicles into the parking area on the front of the site, a full movement driveway for trucks on the eastern portion of the site, which is technically Scott Avenue, and then 1 right out egress driveway onto Main Street. We're forcing trucks to make that right out back onto Main Street. There's no reason really for them to make that left. They're making the right to go westward back to the highway system. We do have a trash enclosure in the refuse area. We can easily get refuse vehicles back there to pick up the refuse and exit the site. There is a design waiver required for the frontage of Scott Avenue. The ordinance requires a sidewalk along all public right of ways. We're not proposing that sidewalk on Scott Avenue because it essentially would serve no purpose. So we are requesting the design waiver for that, but we are proposing the sidewalk along the entirety of Main Street. In terms of grading, I'll keep it simple. We are complying completely with all local county and state requirements. We are proposing an above ground infiltration basin to provide water quality, as well as 5 green manufactured Filterra units to provide water quality for the southern portion of the site. All the stormwater management ultimately makes it to the northern portion of the area, which is Raritan Bay. As I mentioned, there's a Laurel Street right of way, historically had a storm sewer system through that. We are relocating that around our site completely. So we are reconstructing that and providing a new outfall to the Raritan Bay. There is a floodplain consideration on this site. Based on current floodplain mapping, the floodplain on this site is about 15 to 16 elevation. The existing site's about elevation 10, between 8 and 10. So we're raising the site about 8 feet in certain areas to get out of the floodplain. So that did play a role in some of the grading and design on this project. There are retaining walls required for that reason. We do need to raise the site out of the floodplain as required by state and federal regulations. So there are retaining walls that you see on the plan. Essentially at the maximum height, the maximum retaining wall height is about 8 feet in height. All of the retaining walls will have guide rails and fencing for protection of trucks as well as passenger vehicles. In terms of utilities, we have all public utilities on the site: electric, gas, water, and sewer. There's an existing 24-inch water main that cuts through the middle of the site, which we are currently in the process of relocating with Middlesex Water. So it'll be completely relocated away from the site. In terms of landscaping and buffering, we're providing a substantial amount of landscaping on the site. 436 total plantings are proposed, which include 18 shade trees, 5 ornamental trees, 20 evergreen trees, and 365 evergreen shrubs. They're scattered throughout the site. As you can see on this exhibit, we provided an evergreen row along the front of the site where the parking area is, provided shade trees on the southwest portion of the site. We provided additional shrubbery within the western and northern portions of the site, and then a buffer along the Scott Avenue right away on the east side of the site. For lighting, all of the lighting will be LED lights, modern lights. They'll all be downward facing, maximum mounting height of 20 feet in height. In total, we have only 5 area lights on this entire project, and the remainder of the lights are all mounted on the building. There's a total of 18 lights total on the site. On the south portion of the site, there are a number that light up the parking area, and then that wraps around to the rear of the site to provide lighting throughout the site. We are providing house side shields on the area lights. Although we really don't have any neighbors, we provided those house shield lights to prevent or limit light spillage onto Scott Avenue as well as to the adjacent properties, one of which is the municipal pump station. There is a waiver, however. There is a maximum of 0.5 foot candles required at property lines, and we have a total of a maximum of 0.9 foot candles along the Scott Avenue property right of way line. And again, that's public right of way. There's no neighbors that it impacts. Our closest neighbor is the pump station. Beyond that is the Beacon Metal scrap metal yard. So it doesn't really impact neighbors at all. It's a negligible increase over the maximum. The lighting is very uniform throughout the site. We have a minimum of 0.5 foot candles on the pavement, which will provide safe and efficient lighting for any passengers or for any pedestrians throughout the site. There's another waiver required. The ordinance requires 1 foot candle maximum or 1 foot candle minimum light levels in sidewalks. We do comply with that within the sidewalk along the front of our site, which is where a vast majority of the passengers and pedestrians are going to be on the site. But the DEP actually requires that we provide a waterfront walkway. I believe your board engineer asked us to provide testimony on that, but the NJDEP requires that we have that public walkway for public water access because we do have direct frontage on the Raritan Bay. So we do have that sidewalk that wraps around the back of the site. And in certain areas, we have less than 1 foot candle along that walkway. We're just trying to limit the amount of lights that we have on the site. That walkway is really just intended for very limited recreational use for the public as required by the DEP.
Excuse me, could you just explain that one more time, the walkway, and maybe point it out? to
Yeah,
us over
absolutely. The DEP, under the coastal zone management rules, requires that we provide public access on this particular property because it has direct frontage on the Raritan Bay. Raritan Bay is on the top of the exhibit. The public walkway is located on the western portion of the site, and it wraps around the back of the site, which is the north, and then it wraps to the furthest northern corner of the site. So it is required by the DEP. It'll be completely open. It won't be gated off from the public, but it is something that is required by the DEP just for public use.
So
So,
be concrete.
yeah, it'd be concrete sidewalk. Just quickly, in terms of signage, we're proposing one monument sign. The maximum sign area required by the ordinance is 85 square feet. The sign is 85 square feet, so it complies with the ordinance. Maximum sign height is 15 feet. We're providing only 12.62 feet in height, so that also complies. There is a variance required for the setback for this sign. 25 feet is required. We are providing only 5 feet along the frontage of Main Street. As Mr. Smith mentioned, it's really just a function of a safe location for that sign to identify the site. We have the parking in the front of the site. We do have a green space on the southwestern portion of the site, but putting it in that green space would set it back behind the landscaping. It'd be much more difficult to identify the site there. So what we did was we located it closer to the driveways at the southeastern corner of the site, which really only leaves us about 5 feet to fit it there, considering the retaining walls and the parking area layout. So we do have a 5-foot setback.
Could you just show it to us on the
Yeah,
map?
yeah. It's identified right here at the southeast corner of the site, right by the proposed truck driveway near the parking area.
Thank you.
And then we do have a clearance requirement of 18 inches in the ordinance. We have a 0-foot clearance only because this is a monument sign. I think everyone would agree that a monument sign is a more ideal sign design compared to the more traditional freestanding sign. This is at ground. We're going to have a brick base around it, landscaping around it. So it'll definitely be a much more aesthetically pleasing sign compared to an old fashioned freestanding sign on pylons. We're proposing one wall mounted sign, 85 square feet is allowed. We are proposing 85 square feet. There are no variances required for the wall mounted sign. You'll see that on the architect's rendering in a few minutes. And then we do have 4 directional signs at the driveways. 2 square feet is allowed by ordinance. We're proposing 2 square feet maximum. Based on my interpretation of the ordinance, those signs also need to be set back 25 feet from the front property line, which is not ideal or really realistic for this because we need to identify the driveways. So we have them set back 5 feet from the front, just so that they're directly adjacent to the proposed driveways. That really covers my direct testimony. There's a number of outside agency approvals that the applicant is seeking. As I mentioned before, we did receive the board professional and board planners letters, which we have no problem addressing, but I'd be happy to touch on anything else in more detail if you'd like.
I have a couple questions. The area behind the warehouse there that you don't know, is that developable in any way?
No, it's all coastal wetlands, freshwater wetlands, environmentally restrained.
Right. Now, you had mentioned about the retaining walls that's going to raise 8 feet. Is that just for the warehouse? I guess, I'm thinking you're going down Scott Avenue and you got to go up 8 feet to get onto your property. Is that how
No,
it's going to work? Or
great question. No, we have a subtle grade that comes off of Scott Avenue. It's a very subtle grade. It's a maximum slope of about 5%. So you come up the driveway, the foundation of the warehouse is actually exposed. And then you eventually get to an elevation where you could walk flush into the building. That applies to all the driveways on the site. So it's not steep. It's a very subtle grade. It's something you wouldn't even notice as you drive into the site.
And I believe, did you say all the trucks will enter on Scott Avenue
Yes, correct.
and not at the other locations?
Correct. The western driveway is an egress only driveway.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Sure.
You indicated you reviewed our report. You're okay with addressing all the outstanding items? They're mainly technical items, but
Yes.
just get that on the record.
Yes, I do.
The monument sign on the corner, just for the record, any site triangle issues or you have the appropriate clearances?
We have the appropriate clearance. There's no side triangle issues.
Thank you.
One of the, Shay, you say this report here, they're gonna,
The applicant's engineer indicated he was able to comply with all the items in our report. I don't know if, Mr. Chairman, if you wanted to go item by item, but he indicated he would comply.
no, I just had a couple. The first item here, it talks about all the other approvals you get. Who oversees that they get them and it's recorded? Who does that?
Chairman, as far as overseeing, they're responsible for obtaining them, but they're required to provide copies to our office. It's the next phase of the project. If you approve it, is called resolution compliance. We would make sure that all the conditions of your approval and all the items in our report are taken care of before we can advise the board secretary that they've met all the conditions and the plans are approved. And same thing with Mr. Barry. If he has any other issues, we'd make sure they were addressed and we get a sign-off letter from him to say that he complies with the resolution conditions.
So, and let me just add to that, not only does your professional staff do compliance review to make sure we've satisfied every condition, it's also true that if any of these agencies say we don't have jurisdiction or we're not interested, we give them the not interested letter and that complies with it as well. But it gets checked out. We can't get a building permit unless we do resolution compliance.
It seemed like there were so many of them that was required on that.
Well,
first
the
page.
answer is we agree if necessary. You know, there may be some in the list that are, not to use the word boilerplate, but to use the word boilerplate, they may be on the list just because you want to list everything that might possibly apply, but some of them may not apply, in which case we get a letter saying it's not applicable to this project.
And also, Mr. Chairman, there was discussion about the Laurel Street right-of-way, which is a paper street. That's going to have to be vacated by the mayor and council in order to allow this development to take place. So the applicant has submitted an application to the mayor and council. The council has discussed it. They're in the process of introducing an ordinance, but they did provide a letter indicating that they were okay with this application proceeding before the vacation ordinance is adopted.
Thank you. I have no other questions. Anybody else have questions? Continue.
Actually, if I may, before lighting on the monument sign and lighting on the wall mounted signage, are they internally has there been any thought about that? I know it'll probably be tailored to the eventual tenant, but I was wondering.
Yeah, it's currently contemplated to be internally illuminated, the monument and the wall sign.
And we usually ask that the monument sign by the street have the street address prominently on there, at least the street number for the tractor trailers.
Yeah, I see no reason to not provide that. We can certainly provide that.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions for Mr. Mueller, we'll call her. Okay. Our next witness is Mr. Craig Paraguay, our traffic engineer. I'd ask that he be called and sworn so that he can give testimony.
Craig, please raise your right hand. Swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes, I do.
Please give us your name, spell your last name.
Sure. My name is Craig Paraguay, Peregoy.
Thank you. Please continue.
Mr. Paraguay, for the record, by whom are you employed in what capacity? And I also think you should go right on to a brief description of your credentials.
Sure. I'm employed by Dynamic Traffic. I'm a principal at the firm. As far as credentials, I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey. I testify pretty much on a nightly basis as an expert in traffic. I've been here a number of times, although I didn't recognize the place with so many empty seats. I got to say, usually I'm here and there's a lot more
We
English.
accept your credentials.
All right, if I might, one more question.
Question. In preparation for tonight's testimony, did you study the project and what its impact might be on the traffic in Sayreville, and what conclusions did you reach?
Sure, we did. We prepared a traffic impact study. I'll take you through very briefly what we did, and obviously you want any more detail, I can provide that. But we started, as we typically do, taking traffic counts. We looked at the main street intersections with Oak Street and Scott Avenue. They're obviously right across the street from the property. What we're looking at is the critical weekday morning and evening peak time periods. That's the most critical time periods where you'd see the roadway have its least excess capacity to accommodate additional traffic. So basically a worst case scenario. We took those counts in November of 2021. So obviously there's a concern that the pandemic and that COVID has made some sort of changes in those volumes, but we're fortunate in this location that the New Jersey DOT had a tube count, an ATR count, automatic count out there before COVID. So we were able to review our counts versus that, adjust our numbers up to get to what the 2022 traffic volumes theoretically should be, had we not been going through the pandemic. Now, I don't know if we're ever going to get back to the levels that we were before. It seems like it's slowly coming back, but volumes are still a little bit lower, but nevertheless, we wanted to get that worst case scenario. So the next thing I have to do is sort of look into the future and see what traffic's going to be like when this project is up and running. So there's a couple things we do. We add a growth rate that New Jersey DOT gives us for this area. It's a 1% per year growth rate. I added that times 2 years to our counted volumes. We also know of another warehouse development that was just approved recently to this in South Amboy on Long Main Street, and a larger almost 500 unit residential community also in South Amboy that's going to close enough that it would probably have a direct impact. So we added those traffic volumes that we expect to see from those developments across the site frontage too. The next step is to add our traffic, what this project's going to generate. And we assess that with the ITE, the Institute of Transportation Engineers. They publish trip rates based on research counts conducted at similar facilities. In this case, this type of warehouse has a pretty substantial amount of data. So we are able to use that to project the traffic volumes that would be generated from this site. And just to give you an idea of those numbers, during the weekday morning peak hour, the one busiest hour in the morning, this would generate 38 vehicle trips. In the evening peak hour, 41 vehicle trips. Now, typically you prepare a traffic impact study, or you have a little bit extra concern about traffic impacts for uses that generate 100 or more trips. That's what DOT considers a significant traffic generator. So we're less than half of that threshold. You heard Mr. Smith before say this is a baby warehouse. So it's not certainly the size that's going to generate a substantial amount of traffic volume
Excuse me, one
in
question.
and out.
When you talk about those numbers, does that include the tractor trailers and the cars that are the 90 cars that will be going into the place?
It does. Yes, it includes, and we're talking about the one busiest hour. It's about 15% in the peak hour is trucks. Whereas you'd have a higher percentage of trucks in the middle of the day because the employees aren't coming in and out, but it's on the order of 5 to maybe 7 trucks an hour at its busiest time that would be generated by a project of this size. So the employee traffic during the rush hour time period is a little bit busier. Again, if you look at the specific numbers for the peak hours, it's 5 truck trips in the morning and 6 truck trips in the evening peak hour. So 1 truck every 10 minutes at the busiest time of the day. So anyway, I add that traffic volume to the counts that I adjusted for COVID, added the adjacent developments, added that 1% growth rate. Now I add these traffic volumes on top of that and take a look at how the intersections are going to operate, the driveways, and then Oak Street, obviously, and Scott Avenue with a capacity analysis. It's based on the traffic volumes, the turning movements, the lane widths, the stop control. We're able to determine the operation of the intersection and if it will be satisfactory based on the delay per vehicle, which is then related to a level of service. A being the best, F being a failing or the worst condition. In this case, we have no failing levels of service. We have good acceptable levels of service, even with that fairly conservative estimate. And again, that's something that I would expect based on the smaller warehouse, fairly lower traffic generation that you'd see out of a project of this size. Certainly permitted uses in this zone could be much higher traffic generators than something like this. Despite the size of the building, they tend to be a little bit quieter in terms of vehicles in and out. Mr. Mueller pointed out the parking requirements. We exceed your ordinance requirements, and I think this is basically right in line with what I've seen in other warehouse developments in terms of the number of parking spaces for a spec warehouse to provide flexibility for them to get a good tenant. The last thing I wanted to touch on was the sign that was pointed out. I agree with Mr. Mueller. There's really no sense in putting it where you could achieve that setback. You want to define where the driveway is. You do have people coming here in trucks that may not be familiar with it, they need to see where that access point is. The last thing you want is a truck driver not knowing where he's going and hesitating. So I think it makes all the sense in the world to have it clearly visible, defining where that driveway is in this case, especially with the curve in the road. You got a line of utility poles. The visibility wouldn't be great if you were 25 feet back. So I think where it is appropriate. That's really it in terms of traffic impact. I mean, I think what really shines about this project is the ability to get all that traffic right up to 287, the Turnpike, 440, and none of it's really coming through Sayreville. The only traffic coming into town, if you have an employee who lives in town. Otherwise, it's right out of here. So it's a perfect location from a traffic perspective.
So
The only item I wanted to have you reemphasize, and it was one that Mr. Mueller mentioned. We've examined the truck turning, negotiating the rear of the property, et cetera.
yes,
So what's your opinion of circulation and any issues with regard to the wheelbase of the trucks?
Yeah, we've reviewed the truck turning templates to make sure that they can appropriately navigate. They certainly can. This is an odd shaped site, so it's not very easy to get full circulation and get a warehouse to fit like this. This was a pretty good job to be able to do this and keep the truck activity separated from the employees, keep it behind the site. And then I think providing this circulation around for the trucks to zip right out. So they're coming in on one side generally and going out on the other side, the way they like to, where the driver's side is closer to where they're backing in. It's a great layout for, kind of an odd shaped site. Worked out well.
Mr. Paraguay is available for questions.
Yeah, I have, well, go ahead, Jay.
Mr. Chairman, for the board's information, could you explain what you're doing to Old Route 4 or Main Street
Yes.
concerning the double lane? And also just talk about what the county, if they reviewed that, if they're okay with what's being proposed?
Yeah, we've met with the county twice. They actually requested us to do this. Right now, there's left turn lanes into this driveway into Oak Street and Scott Avenue. So they're kind of in opposition to the left turns into our site. So the best solution for that, and you see this is a favored solution of Middlesex County, is to provide that continuous center left turn lane. This way, you don't have a defined queue storage for each driveway. It's more flexible. And what it does too is it helps pulling out, making a left turn out. It gives you a little bit of buffer between the two lanes of traffic. So you could even stage in that turn lane and make your turn in two moves, but it's just a nice separation between the traffic. So it helps not only pulling the left turns out of the through traffic, it also helps you get out of the side street as well. So that's why they like these. And I think
This
it makes sense in this location for
it's
sure.
got this county seal of approval.
It did. We met with them twice. This is their request and they've seen this design and they're okay with it.
I just have two other questions. You had mentioned about the South Amboy development, 500 homes. I think it's like 1,700 homes.
That's the one that's been constructed or under construction. There's another one that was more recently approved. As my understanding is it was 499 units.
On the bay there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the whole project was approved for like 1,700 units or so.
That may be part of the larger.
And I believe, Joan, did we receive a notice from South Amboy that they're going to be putting up 2 warehouses along there as well? Were they taken into consideration at all? Do you know?
Yeah, that we worked on that's the other warehouse, Woodmont project, I believe what it's called. There may be another one that hasn't been approved yet that's before them, but similar size to this.
Any other questions from the board?
Yeah, it essentially is the driveway. This road that leads to the back to the truck parking area, that's what was the gravel Scott Avenue. It's a driveway. It's being vacated.
Well, let me get Mr. Mueller back up.
He's the guy who's gonna tell us how much asphalt.
He's gonna go in there. Go ahead.
Yeah, it'll be drived as a public road. It's not just a driveway. It's technically a public road. Yeah, we don't own it, but we are improving it to be a public road. Right now, it's gravel. It's very poorly maintained, and we're extending that pavement and curbing to to the pump station as well as our property.
Right, and that'll be to the municipal standards, correct?
Yes.
I don't know if Mr. Cornell heard that.
Yeah, we're providing storm sewer, curbing, piping, standard pavement section all through that roadway. So.
Yeah, and also, Mr. Chairman, for the board's information, the borough does have a wastewater pumping station that's located beyond the limits of that back access drive. They are going to go through and improve that beyond their property and into the site access. So there is some improvement to provide access to that borough wastewater station as part of this project.
And how wide will that road be?
30, it's over actually 32. Borough standard is 30. I think they've got 32.3. And then it narrows down to 20 feet once it gets beyond that back driveway leading into the pump station, which is sufficient for borough maintenance vehicles.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, who will maintain that road? The borough or the
That-
private road that they're
that's-
gonna maintain?
That's a borough responsibility.
Borough
Yeah, so it's
maintains.
existing. Right-of-way. Actually, I'm just thinking Scott Avenue is actually a county road. On the opposite side, I don't think it's county continuing all the way through. So it would, I would say be borough maintenance. responsibility.
Properties on the opposite side of Scott, they eventually be developed.
The opposite side is Beacon Metal, so it's already developed. They have access coming in off of Old Route 4 or Main Street. There's actually a retaining wall that's being proposed along almost the entire length, just because of some grading concern with connecting existing grades into the new grades of Scott Avenue.
So they won't use Scott Avenue.
They don't currently, I don't know if they have any plans in the future, if it's improved to use that, but there's nothing there currently.
So I can just get a clarification. You may have given this testimony, so I apologize if you did. I do remember the truck testimony. So the trucks will take a left in, proceed counterclockwise, exit the property in a right-only fashion. Passenger vehicles in the passenger parking lot. So they have two-way access for passenger vehicles on Scott. And then the other point that's kind of midway, that's also to, in and out and full turn left and right turns for the center as well.
Yes, correct. It's along that center turn lane. So.
Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paraguay. Our next witness is Mr. Charles Dietz, who is our architect. Mr. Dietz, if you come forward and be sworn.
You, Mr. Dietz, swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes,
And please give us your name, spell your last name.
Charles P. Dietz, D-I-E-T-Z, Managing Member of the Dietz Partnership LLC Architects.
Okay, Mr. Dietz, if you would, by whom are you employed, in what capacity? Give us the short benefit of your credentials.
I am the Managing Member of the Dietz Partnership, so I am the Dietz of the Dietz Partnership. I have a Bachelor's of Architecture degree from the New Jersey School of Architecture at NJIT. I'm a licensed professional architect with a license in good standing in the state of New Jersey for the past 33 years. I also hold 14 other licenses in other states around the country. And,
We'll accept your.
thank you.
You barely got in with those credentials. So the two questions, so we don't have to pass the microphone back and forth. Number one, tell us what it's going to look like, or even better, show us what it's going to look like. And then secondly, if you describe for the board the green features, the sustainability features for the project.
You can have the.
I actually have two boards. The first one that you see before you, I don't think has to be marked because it's just the duplication of the two sheets that we presented to the board, our A1 floor plan and our A2 exterior elevations. And then secondly, then I'll get into my testimony. I'm assuming we would have to mark this. I believe you have a design handout that was presented. No? Yes?
Yeah.
Did we not hand those out?
I don't have.
Oh, okay.
Anybody,
I thought we were handing those out. We have 11 renderings from various angles, various viewpoints of the property and the project. Did you want to mark each one, or can we just group them as a bundle and say,
Why don't we mark it as A-3 at 11 colored renderings?
I should have taken that out. get to the good stuff in a minute. Come back. Basically, I can reiterate what both Mr. Brown, Mr. Mueller, and council has mentioned. In the state of the industrial warehouse and logistic market in New Jersey and New York, where I do most of my buildings, this is on the smaller side to many of the other projects that I'm doing at approximately 114,000 square foot footprint. Most of the projects I'm working on are upwards of 200,000 up to 500,000 square feet. So I agree and concur with everything that's been testified before me, that this is on the smaller side. If I could just point out, because our drawings are a little bit larger scale, a little easier to the eye to see, we have a main entrance at the southeast corner of the building. All the vehicular parking for the employees and or visitors is in that front yard with a sidewalk and an accessible entrance into the building with a ramp to pick up the grading. Across the front, we're proposing 2 utility rooms in the front to accept all the utilities coming onto the site that the civil engineer has worked to bring to the building. As we discussed, there's 13 loading docks on the rear of the building with an egress stair, and then 2 drive-up ramps on either side flanking both of those loading docks. And as you can see, we have landscaping around the balance of the building where the trucks are not going to be accessing or the vehicular traffic. It's pretty standard warehouse design. And again, I presented to you previously, it's going to be a concrete panel building, either precast or tilt wall construction, which is very standard in the industry. And what we like to do as architects, and thankfully we have an applicant and an owner that, as he testified to, they like to do a little higher end type of architecture that allows us to do that. So we break up the monotony of these long buildings. We've identified the entrance and accentuate the entrance with a bumped up set of panels, tall glass on the panels, because we do have a mezzanine office. So it allows us to increase the glass in that area. We have a canopy that will be covering that entrance and that glass on the lower level, which again serves 2 purposes: an architectural aesthetic and also the cover for patrons and the employees to put their umbrellas up or down as they enter or leave the building. And then we're also proposing a nice feature along the street frontage on Main Street to accentuate that entrance. At this location, at the far end of the building, is a simulated wood feature in a decorative color. I've done this several times on a couple of buildings in the neighborhood, and the council have really liked that. It's a feature that really softens that concrete look on the building. You can see it's a 2-story element on both sides. And then what we traditionally do in most of our warehouses, we like to present a clear story or an upper set of windows that fit between each of the column bays that shed some natural light, which also works in the LEED standards to provide some extra light that helps bring light into the warehouse area. So it helps with your inside lighting and economy for the lighting levels. But what we were able to do with this one, which is unusual, they're usually 5 by 5 square windows. We've presented these as a little more rectilinear in nature because of the height of the building, and we have taller than standard windows there, which will let in some really beautiful light as the sun comes around the building during the day. And then we've also articulated the building with both horizontal and vertical score lines to break up that facade. And within that articulation, we've picked several areas. And when I get to the color renders, you'll see these darker colors are actually accent paints. So we have a series of colors, warm earth tone colors. And I think it really came out nicely in working with this applicant. My first time, I'm very impressed with their portfolio and what they've allowed us to do and what they're presenting to this town. I think it'll be a beautiful building. And you can see we've actually carried these features around all 4 sides. So you can see the side as you come down Scott Avenue, same tall glass, architectural clear story windows, and the accent features the same on the left side of the building. And we've actually carried these architectural features to the rear at the loading dock areas, as Mr. Mueller testified, facing Raritan Bay, that no one will actually ever see. But this applicant is actually willing to spend the money to make this a finished, beautiful 4-sided building, even though it doesn't need to. And with that, I'll go to Exhibit A3, which are a series of the color renderings. I think the biggest, we did already, A3 11 renderings, today's date. The biggest joy we had with this project is all the warehouses, and I'm sure you've seen it, warehouses are gray. And we do very variations of gray. Well, this client decided, let's get out of the gray mold and go a little more earth tone. And then the browns and the tans and the warmer colors on the building. And I think it really makes a difference. It's a statement. I don't think you're going to see anything like this in Sayreville or any other surrounding communities. And I'm actually trying to do it in some other locations around the state because I was really getting tired of the gray palette as much as I love gray. So again, as I testified to, here's your main entrance. As you come up the sidewalk, you have a metal canopy that protrudes off the face of the building to provide cover and articulation. The simulated wood on both sides here. And at this end, 2-story glass. And then the reason we really have the height variance that was discussed already is twofold. Modern warehouses, modern logistics centers, height is a premium. To get tenants, you have to provide the height. So we're doing that. And as Mr. Muller stated, the height is actually only a 50-foot tall parapet, 52 feet at the bump up, because the ordinance requires us to calculate that height based on the average grade around the building. Well, we know when we get to the back, we're dropping down 4 feet for the docks. That adds to our height. Hence, we came up with the 54.10, I believe, actual average height of the building. But with that articulation, we're able to raise some of these parapets, create some relief along these facades at a couple locations. So again, this is your main street. And I think it really helps define this building, articulate this building. And even at 114,000 square feet, I think with all these architectural features and accent color elements, I think it really downplays the size of the building at 50 feet in the air, and the softness of the color palette, I think will help do that as well. Again, the side elevation, you can see the score lines, both vertical and horizontal, continue. The long, tall, clear story windows with accent paints around it, I think really identify this building as something special in the community. I don't know if I have to show you all 11, but I'll just show you a couple of the other views. Another aerial. Let me actually have a couple close-ups. I could actually speak loud enough without the mic, if that's okay. Basically zoomed in so you get a better feel for what the entrance of the building will look like, parking, coming up the sidewalk, up the ramp to meet the grade for the various ADA conditions, and then into the building, the canopy, the simulated wood, the tall glass. I mean, it reminds me more of an office building than a traditional warehouse that you find on highways and in industrial zones throughout the state of New Jersey.
Mr. Deets, is that marked?
They asked me to just make A3,
Everything?
all 11
Yeah,
renderings are
yeah, the
A3.
description of A3 is 11 renderings. So you have to mark all of them. Save on the ink. It's part of the, the leads.
Jump. Again, kind of the same view. Again, more of a head-on shot that shows you the ramp, the railing that gets you in from the grading, an accessible way, steps on the one side, ramp on the other, get you into the main entrance. But I think if you looked at that, you would find this type of design on an office building versus a warehouse. So we're very impressed that the client allowed us and his team to come together and I think really create a very special building for the town of Sayreville. I think everybody will be pleased with it. I'm gonna jump to the back, I think. Yeah, why don't we jump to the back? Just to show what we spoke about, that the back of the building, even though it really doesn't face any population, it faces Raritan Bay. So if you're out sailing, you'll get to see a beautiful building. Stuck. So again, you can see this aerial view, shows you the rear of the building, the loading docks, without any tractor trailers, the 2 drive-in ramps. But you can see the articulation, the score lines, the accent colors are prominent throughout the back as they are on both sides and in the front. So I think the applicant should be congratulated for going that extra mile and that extra step to create this type of facility in your town. And you can see the 2 relief bump ups at the front, which really get us to that 54-foot, 10-inch dimension for the variance. I think, like I said, because of the colors and the architectural features that are on the building, I think it downplays the actual size and the height of this building. So I think where its location, I think it's a beautiful design, and I think it'll be a great asset to Sayreville. I'll show you one last.
Excuse me, sir, a quick question.
Sure.
You can move that sheet there. Does that show the walkway for the residents or the
No.
recreational?
Well, it's part of it. It shows it up here coming around. It doesn't show it going all the way to the water, but it starts where it's supposed to. It actually should continue further all the way down.
So it's pretty close to your building.
Yeah. When you get on this side, yeah, you're pretty tight to the building, and then it opens up as you get to the back when you saw on the site plan, because that is the tight part of the site. But I think what we really want to portray is that, you know, this is a four-sided warehouse building that, you know, has beautiful architectural articulations and colors on all four sides. So I think it'll be an asset to the community.
Green features.
Green features, we are proposing, as I said, these clear story windows help in the lighting design on the inside of the building because we are getting natural light. And most modern warehouses that we're designing today have the interior lights set up on a sensor system. So if there's no movement, there's no there's no vehicles or anything moving inside, the lights will dim down. They'll come on as soon as the sensor picks up that people are going by. We are wiring the building for solar on the roof. So I would say this would be a smart design building. We'll have energy efficient glass and we'll meet all the insulation values of the energy code for the state of New Jersey. So it's a modern building with
Charging infrastructure.
and we'll have charging infrastructure, yes, as Mr. Mueller testified to. So the applicant almost has to do this if they're going to be in the marketplace competing with other buildings for the modern logistics type tenants, because they're going to demand it. So not only does it help the environment, it's something they almost have to do if they want to compete with the other buildings with the national type tenants that are in the marketplace to occupy a building like this.
Is that pretty good rendering how close it's going to be to Main Street there?
Yes, we give them the site plan and our architectural plans, and the third party render kind of puts it in as it's going to be with the proper heights, the utility poles. You actually had some trees that weren't there. We had them removed. So it's a pretty close depiction of what it would look like from that angle at that height going down, other than it's a rainy morning, I guess. The ground's still wet.
Was there any issue about it? Was there like another lane to be made there? So what's going on there with traffic, traffic lanes?
That's what the applicant's traffic engineer spoke about. Where there's a concrete island now, that's a grassed island, that's going to be removed, and there's going to be a shared lane, left and right turns along the front of the site.
Understand. Okay, thank you.
Right. Yes, if there'll be small units for the office area. The rest that you would have is just your ventilation units. You'd have unit heaters inside that would temper the building to make sure the sprinkler system doesn't freeze. But we can testify that if the parapets don't block them, we could possibly screen them if necessary. But again, warehouses aren't like office buildings and retails where you have tons and tons of air conditioning units up and down the building, because warehouses usually aren't conditioned, just tempered. Correct.
Any other questions from the board?
Yes, I think Mr. Mueller testified to that. Yes.
Anything to prevent someone who wants to charge a vehicle that doesn't work here? You like to give away free energy.
You got a credit card, you can swipe it, you're good.
I continue. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, our last witness, thank you, is Mr. Matt Flynn, who is the younger version of John McDonough. I'd ask Mr. Flynn to come forward and be sworn so he can give testimony.
Good evening, sir. Do you swear in, swear firm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please give us your name, spell your last name.
Matt Flynn, Flynn.
Thank you. Please continue.
Mr. Flynn, for the record, by whom are you employed, and also give us the benefit of your credentials?
Sure, I'm employed by John McDonough Associates with a business address of 101 Gibraltar Drive, Morris Plains, New Jersey. I have my master's degree from Rutgers in planning and public policy, as well as my professional planner's license in the state of New Jersey, and my national certification for planners, which is the AICP certification.
Thank you.
And you've testified before other planning and zoning boards?
I have testified before several planning and zoning boards.
Okay.
Accept your credentials.
So if you would, it'll make it really easy. Give us a justification under the municipal land use law for the use and bulk variances we're requesting from the board. And if the board wants to see a full list of everything, the HGA memo, the last one that you received, page 3 of 6, goes right down the list. And your job tonight, Mr. Flynn, is to tell us why this is a good thing for the board to do.
Understood. So we are in the B3 business highway business zone where warehouses are not permitted. Importantly, we are compliant in terms of the front setback to Main Street. We're proposing 50 feet where 50 feet is required. We're compliant in terms of side setbacks. We're proposing 103 feet, whereas only 10 feet is required. Compliant in terms of the rear yard setback, proposing 100 feet as opposed to the 25 feet required, as well as impervious coverage, proposing 56% as opposed to the 85% that would be allowed. We do need a building coverage variance for 28.5% as opposed to the 25% that is permitted, which is just slightly over the requirement there. Importantly, the SED zone where warehouses are permitted permits up to 60% for lot coverage. So in terms of what's contemplated for this specific land use, it's not really out of the realm of what's appropriate for this particular land use. In terms of the front setback to Scott Avenue, we're proposing 10 feet as opposed to the 50 feet, which is a result of the geometry of the site with our, you can see on the site plan there, that eastern side kind of bends into the site itself, which creates the situation where the building gets closer to the lot line as you extend north.
Let me just sneak in a word
Sure.
here too. The problem with the way the ordinance is written, the applicant's being. Yeah, I need to do it if I'm going to testify in particular. The problem is that your ordinance is written in such a way that this applicant is being punished for 2 front yards. All right, in effect, they're saying do a front yard setback on Scott, which, as we've all heard tonight, is really the driveway entrance into this facility and a brand new road for the municipal facility at the end of the street. But in effect, if you say, let's do a 50 on that side, you're doing two 50s, you're dramatically reducing the ability of the lot to be functional. So I'm not a licensed planner, but I always like to bring up the 2 front yard situation because it does really kind of cripple properties.
Thanks. Yeah, and just to jump off that, as I mentioned, the rear yard and the side yard setbacks are way over the required minimum there. So in terms of the overall setbacks, the site is certainly well served in that regard. In terms of the height variance, we are proposing 54.71 feet as opposed to 35 feet. That's a normal height associated with this land use, but I'll get into that in a minute. Just to get back into the B3 zone, as I said, warehouses are not a permitted use in the B3 zone. They are permitted use in the SED zone, as well as a permitted accessory use in the I zone. To the extent that this is a business zone and not an industrial zone, I think that we did see a beautiful architectural rendering. So it will fit in with all those permitted uses in the business zone there. Kind of looks like an office building, which office buildings are permitted in the B3 zone. In terms of some of the other permitted uses in the B3 zone, because we are looking at a use variance, car wash, auto repair, restaurant, bar, hotel is a conditional use, gym, gas station is a conditional use, among some other larger scale retail uses. This site at about 400,000 square feet is much larger than the minimum required lot area in the B3 zone, which requires 20,000 square feet. So we're 20 times the minimum lot area in the B3 zone. So all of those permitted uses really would not be appropriate for a lot this large. Whereas a warehouse, I think, fits in pretty nicely, especially if we're able to blend it in the way that we are with our landscaping and our architecture. Just in terms of compatibility with some of the nearby zones, we are adjacent to the RAW waterfront redevelopment area, within which I think there's something like 268 acres of land that would permit warehousing. And we are 400 feet west from South Amboy, and the immediate zone district in that township would be the M1 industrial zone, which also permits warehousing. So I think there's nice compatibility with the zoning that surrounds us as well. In terms of the master plan, I'll just read the sentence that I found in the master plan. It reads, quote, "Many properties in the B3 zones are underutilized and do not project a favorable image to the borough. Reinvestment in improved site and building design, signage, connections between adjoining uses, and improved management are needed." It also states that the district is intended to allow community and regional scale commercial uses that rely heavily on automobile and truck access. In terms of the economic objectives of the master plan, just to name a few: increase the borough's rateable base, revitalize commercial corridors on Route 9 and Route 35, as well as to continue to evaluate and improve the Main Street corridor, emphasizing the need to fill in gaps along the streetscape that results from large, underutilized, unlandscaped lots. So I think that the application certainly is in line with all of those master plan guidelines. So to get into the use variance for the D1 use variance, it's a four-prong test. It comes from the Medici case. The first prong is known as site suitability, which is the enhanced burden of proof for use variances. In terms of the condition of the site, it's 20 times the minimum requirement of the B3 zone. So of course, as I said, those permitted uses would not be appropriate on a lot this large. As I said, the proposed use is a good alternative in that it's a low intensity use, not creating much of a traffic impact. In terms of its context, historically, the property has been used for industrial, and it's compatible with land uses around it, both in aesthetic as well as the use of it. The second prong of the Medici use variance test is the promotion of the municipal land use law. There's 20 or so purposes of zoning that are listed in the municipal land use law. The application promotes several of them, including purpose A, promotion of the general welfare. New modern warehousing is a necessary and essential link in the logistic supply chain. Demand for warehouses is increasing. And of course, filling in a huge vacant lot with a cohesive development with nice architecture. Purpose G of the municipal land use law is variety of uses in appropriate locations. Again, given what's around this site, I think that this is an appropriate location with nice compatibility, and it is already heavily influenced by some industrial zones. Purpose I is desirable visual environment, again, filling in that big gap in the B3 zone there. And purpose M is efficient use of land. I think that we do have a nice balance between the bulk requirements in the B3 zone and the necessary bulk of a warehouse, which is laid out in the SED zone. Really very minimal bulk relief is required from the B3 zone and still getting a beneficial project. In terms of the negative impacts, the third prong of the Medici test is there substantial detriment to the public? There's adequate testimony on the record regarding the fact that the site will function safely and efficiently. The imaging is in line with contemporary standards, fitting in with the aesthetics of a permitted office use in this zone. Obviously will look much better to the surrounding properties than what's there now, which is a very large vacant lot. It's a low intensity land use, as we've heard, not creating a traffic issue. Finally, the fourth prong of the use variance test is zone plan impacts. Despite the zoning, the application is not a substantial departure from the bulk requirements of the B3 zone. In terms of the aesthetics, as I said, it will match the aesthetics of an office building in a lot of ways. It's not a typical industrial warehouse with all of those gray colors that we see. And of course, it does further the recommendations of the master plan that I already laid out. In terms of the D6 height variance, again, we are proposing 54.71 feet as opposed to the 35 feet that's required in the B3 zone. Importantly, 50 feet is permitted in the SED zone. So if you were to compare it to that zone where we are a permitted use, we would just be about 4 feet over that height limit. There's adequate testimony on the record regarding the fact that the height is really inherent to the use. A modern warehouse where stackability is key in order to attract a tenant. Basically, the test for the D6 height variance is twofold. The first is intensity, and warehousing is a low intensity use, and the added height does not correlate with increased intensity. In terms of massing and aesthetic, that comes down to light and air, views, shadows. I think that we've seen that this is a pretty isolated project. There's not really any sensitive land uses immediately around us that we would have to be concerned with there. And finally, the height is necessary to effectuate this land use, again, to bring in a tenant and carry forth a beautiful project. In terms of the C relief, I think it's important to note that per the Paleo case, C and D relief cannot coexist because the C relief is really intended to be applied to permitted uses in that zone. But to the extent that we are deviating from those requirements, I'll list them. I've already stated, I think most of them. The front setback to Scott Avenue, 10 feet is proposed as opposed to 50 feet. That's really a result of the site geometry. And as I've noted, we have a substantial rear and side yard that, so to the extent that the intent of the setback requirements is separation between uses, generally that intent is met. As our engineer testified to, Scott Avenue is not your traditional public right-of-way. Right now, it is a gravel roadway. I think there's only 4 properties actually that on Scott Avenue to the north of this, on this part of Scott Avenue that we're talking about. One of which is a vacant lot and undevelopable due to wetlands. One is a treatment plant, and the other 2 are related to a metal treatment plant, which has its main frontage on Main Street. So really, in terms of that front setback to Scott Avenue, I think that there's a very little impact, if any, resulting from that front setback variance. In terms of building coverage, again, 28.5% is proposed as opposed to 25%. It is a de minimis variance. Again, it's typical of the land use in the SED zone. Again, 60% is permitted. And as was stated multiple times, this is on the smaller scale in terms of warehouses. And lot coverage as a whole is well below what would be permitted. The next C variance would be freestanding sign setback. 5 feet is proposed as opposed to 25 feet required, which is half the required front yard. I think that we've already seen that there's really nowhere else to put it, at least nowhere else that would make sense in terms of visibility and safety and access into the site. Overall, this I'll call the sign budget is met. We do have a property that's about 20 times the size of what would be permitted in the zone. So conceivably, we could subdivide this into 10, 15, 20 lots. Each one would be allowed 1 sign. So conceivably, I think the zoning really envisions many signs in this area, and we're only proposing 1. So the intent to avoid signage clutter, I would say, is certainly met here. As I've said, it necessary for safe identification, and it meets the signage area and height limits. And then, of course, the freestanding sign clearance, 18 inches is required, whereas the proposed sign is flush with the ground. It is a ground-mounted sign. I think all of the relief that I just mentioned would satisfy the C2 test for C variances, where the application as a whole would outweigh the benefits of the application as a whole would outweigh any detriments caused by any of these C variances, really necessary to effectuate a positive redevelopment and get all the benefits that I mentioned. I think there is an element of the C1 hardship test, which comes from a hardship related to the size and the shape of the property. I think that we can see based on the site plan that's up now that this is a very abnormally shaped property. And there's also environmental constraints. So all of that, I think, certainly doesn't lend itself to an easy design, but I think we've struck a balance here, proposing something that fits in with all of those constraints. In terms of design setbacks, I think all of which have been gone over. I'd be happy to go over them again. But I think unless the board asks me to, I can suffice it to say that the standard of relief for design exceptions is much more relaxed than the C relief test. The board can grant relief if it meets a standard of reasonableness and a standard of impracticability, meaning that strict or literal enforcement of these design requirements or design standards would serve no practical planning purpose. And I think that test is met here. So with that, I think I can close and open myself up to questions.
Before you open yourself up to questions, how important in terms of this site and its location to nearby transportation facilities is to our argument that this is a good place where the board should consider the use variance?
Absolutely, yeah. So I'd probably skim through that. That definitely goes towards the site suitability component of the Medici test, in that we do have excellent access to the regional highway network. And as our traffic engineer mentioned, it won't require any trucks or vehicles to really travel through any residential areas.
Okay, and an unasked question, but I'm going to ask it. When you looked at the surrounding areas, the surrounding uses, and even the use on this property, would you call them the jewels in Saraville's crown?
I would say that most of the uses around us are industrial in nature. Many of them are vehicle storage lots and similar type uses.
So if the board is kind enough to grant this use variance and height variance, is it your professional opinion that you're going to be greatly upgrading the commercial uses in Saraville in this location?
Absolutely. From an aesthetic standpoint, as well as from a pure land use standpoint, I would say that this will be an upgrade to the site as a whole and hopefully prompt further positive investment in the area.
Great. Mr. Flynn's available for questions.
Any questions? John?
Just two quick ones that are more kind of just to clarify a couple of things. In terms of your analysis of the zoning ordinance and how it may or may not accommodate some of the features necessary for modern warehousing, do you have any thoughts about the ordinance in that context?
Well, I think that first of all, it's important to consider the fact that we're in the B3 zone, which already is setting forth requirements that are not conducive to a warehouse by virtue of the fact that it's not a permitted use. And in terms of the requirements that actually take into account warehousing, I did have a little snippet from the master plan. I'm just trying to find. There is some language in the master plan that states specifically for the Main Street corridor, quote, further investigate the allowance of new emerging uses and promote their ability to locate along the corridor, end quote. So I think that the master plan recognizes the fact that if there is an emerging use, something that might not have been specifically contemplated in the zone plan, it's important to take into account the needs of that type of use.
And then as to the B3 zone itself, did you happen to look at where the B3 zone is generally located throughout the borough and whether or not this particular part of the B3 zone might be a little different than most of the rest of it?
I have, yeah. And I think a lot of the B3 zones in the borough are located along Route 9, if I'm not mistaken. In this particular location, as I've stated, we have adjacency to a redevelopment plan. And we do have adjacency to, not adjacency, but proximity to South Amboy, where there is a industrial zone which permits warehousing, and warehousing is permitted in that adjacent redevelopment plan, albeit not directly adjacent to our site, but another sub-district not too far removed from our site. So I think to answer your question, there's nice compatibility with permitted uses and the uses on the ground for this particular location.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Tom? Anybody? Any questions at all?
So if I can, Mr. Chairman, the 30-second to 60-second summary,
Sure.
and then we're going to decide in concert with the board whether we'd like a vote tonight or not. But the summary in 60 seconds is, this is a chance for the zoning board to do a tremendous favor for your town. You know, you have a great applicant, nationally recognized, have done a lot of these projects all over the United States of America, does a good job. It's new jobs, new ratables for the town. It has relatively minimal traffic impact. And the biggest single thing that is the reminder tonight that the traffic is all going on the adjacent highways. You know, you like I said, I do a lot of these. Whenever I build them in the middle of residential neighborhoods, they're not very popular things. But you have this literally located next to the highways. There's no question where your traffic's going to go. And it's a baby warehouse. It's not a big fulfillment center that's going to knock the socks off the borough. It's a very reasonably sized facility. They're going to put in the necessary traffic infrastructure to ensure that the entrance and exits are safe. It's a good use for the town. So we hope you'll favorably consider it. Now, the tough question. Anybody have any concerns about the application? If you just give me one of these, if you think you need more information or you have doubts about it, if you could just give me a
Personally,
wait.
I think you did a great job, and I think it's a perfect spot for a warehouse. I don't know how the rest of the board views that.
Yeah, I think even though there's nobody in the audience, we do technically.
Yeah, we have to open up to the public, right?
I think your point is well taken, Mr. Smith. I think we'd look to be happy.
Yeah. Open up to the public. Is there anybody out there from the public that would like to comment on this application? Seeing no one, make a motion to close it. Second?
Second.
All in favor? All right. All right, just on a discussion standpoint here, like I said, I think this is a great application, and it's going to really improve the, next to Beacon Metals is going to be a nice complement of, a building down there. That's my own personal feeling. Any other discussion that anybody wants to make, or?
I agree, Mr. Chairman. I think they did a nice design, considering all the aspects of the business.
Any other comments, or? Okay. All right, we have 5 members, I guess. Did you want us to proceed?
So I need to talk to my client. There's only hundreds of $1,000s of work in this, and if any member is having heartburn tonight, it all goes down in flames if we do a vote tonight. Are there any other concerns that members have? Somebody just give me one of these, I have a concern. I would know exactly what I would be doing. or
People are
recommend.
shaking their heads no that they don't have concerns.
There were no concerns being,
Doesn't look to be.
no concerns, no concerns.
Yeah, I mean, no one's say, yeah, I mean, but board members have spoken in favor. It doesn't seem like anyone has any questions or concerns for the application. I think that's correct, right? Everyone's kind of shaking their head, yes. Okay. Want a
Mr.
minute?
Chairman, we'd like to go for the gold. We'd appreciate if you'd take a vote tonight.
Go ahead with the motion.
We need a motion. Personally, I'll make the motion that we approve this application. Let me ask you first, Carl. Sure. Is there any kind of conditions that we should be putting on this motion? We've talked about a lot of things tonight, or is it everything's pretty much set?
The big condition, which is already referenced in both professionals' reports, is the vacation of the right of way for Laurel. So that's a condition of approval. And since it's a use variance, we always incorporate the details as conditions, the size of the warehouse, will be 24-hour operation, things of that nature. That's why I wanted to clarify the site circulation, things like that, so that the use operates well long-term based upon how it's presented. So all those are technically conditions. We don't have things where some applications where we asking people, they have a pool and the pump's next to the neighbor's bedroom window to move it to the other side of the property. So we don't have those level of conditions here because, again, the applicant's done a good job of presenting it. And And again, it hasn't taken into consideration the comments and suggestions of the board professionals at the TRC, which is why I think you had such a nice application. You had an applicant who was willing to work with those suggestions and present something that's pretty cohesive and well thought out. So I think, again, the standard conditions, complying with the reports, the right-of-way vacation is a condition. And then, again, the description of the project is a condition. So those would be our normal conditions of approval on this. So I guess a motion approved with all those conditions?
Yes, I would make a motion that we approve it with all those conditions that we spoke about. Is there a second? Who seconded that? Oh, okay. Roll call?
Mr. Henry.
Yes.
Mr. Savili.
Yes.
Mr. Kaczynski.
Yes.
Mr. Emma.
Yes.
Mr. Bella.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you're going to be really proud of this project.
Thank you. It looks like a great project. Good luck to you. Yeah, we have 3 resolutions that we need to approve.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the first one was Kieran and Gregory at 22 Grand Street, which was replacement of a fence. Application was approved. Resolution's been drafted with the normal conditions and findings. Unless there's any questions, we can take a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call?
Mr. Henry.
Yes.
Mr. Savili.
Yes.
Mr. Kaczynski.
Yes.
Mr. Emma.
Yes.
Mr. Bella.
Yes. The next resolution was for Daniel Braddock at 55 Buttonwood. That was another homeowner to construct a shed on the property, which was approved by the board, and the resolution again contains the usual findings of facts and conditions. And if there's no questions or requests for revisions, we can adopt that resolution.
Second.
Roll call?
Mr. Henry.
Yes.
Mr. Savili.
Yes.
Mr. Kaczynski. Mr. Emma.
Yes.
Mr. Bella.
Yes. And the last resolution we had was for Tesla Inc. at the Wawa station on Route 9. They were adding the supercharging posts and related equipment, which again was approved by the board, and the conditions and facts have been incorporated. There's no questions. We can have a motion to approve that as well.
Second.
Roll call?
Who's that? Anthony.
Roll call?
Mr. Henry.
Yes.
Mr. Savili.
Yes.
Mr. Kaczynski.
Yes.
Mr. Emma.
Yes.
Mr. Bella.
Yes.
And minutes from March 23, anybody have any questions on them? A motion to approve? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? All right. Okay. Is that it? Any other comments from the members? Nothing? Okay. Make a motion to adjourn? All in favor? All right. Thank you.